This week's Parashat Lech Lecha, we really get to know Avram Avinu. Well, we first introduced Avram Avinu at the very end of last week's parasha. We only got to know him a little bit from who his wife is, the fact he didn't have any kids, his father, his brothers, but we didn't really get to know what Avram was all about. This week's parasha, Lech Lecha, it starts off, Hashem speaks to Avraham, Lech Lecha, leave it all behind, make Aliyah, go to the land of Canaan, go to Israel, fulfill this great mission, and Avram follows the Kadosh Baruch Hu with full emunah, and we watch as Avraham starts to build a following, slowly but surely making converts, making followers, becoming strong militarily, financially, making a big change until ultimately God will promise him great, great things, and we're going to see all the chesed and teaching and all the big stuff culminating in next week's parasha with the Akedah Yitzchak at the end, and big stuff happening in these parashiyot. We really get to know Avram Avinu. But there's one story that's missing from the text. There's one story that's not in the Chumash, that every single kid who comes home this week, every little kid who's in Gan, who's in kindergarten, he's going to come home with the same famous story of Avram Avinu. And the story they're going to tell you is of the kivshan haesh, Avram and the fiery furnace. The famous story how Avraham teaches his father a lesson about how idolatry is all silly and worthless, and there's actually really deep theological, philosophical discussions about where God comes from in creation. And if you read the whole Midrashim in detail, how Avram fights with his father and how he fights with Nimrod and all the arguments that he has to prove there's one God in the world, to prove monotheism, it's actually unbelievable from an adult perspective. But from a kid perspective, the kid comes home, will tell you, and Avram fought for God, and he was willing to die for God. He mesirut nefesh. Nimrod throws him into a fiery furnace, into a kivshan haesh, and a great miracle happens, and Avram doesn't die. So that story, kivshan haesh, it's a massive story. It's a main story. And, most of the Rishonim, they hold the story really happened. The Rambam in his Mishnah Torah will put it as a fact, this Midrash really took place, and they see it as a hint in the text with the word or kastim, or meaning fire, because he was thrown into the fire. So there's a lot of hints to this story, but it's not open in the Torah. So why? Why did God not put it in there? And actually it's interesting because we know Avram got tested 10 times. When you look at the count, how do you count Avram's 10 tests? So some commentators count this as the first test, the throwing into the fire. Some count Lech Lecha as the first test. That's the first one written in the Torah. But this great story of the kivshan haesh, it teaches a big lesson. To die for God, mesirut nefesh. That when push comes to shove, someone tells you bow down to idols or believe in one God, it's the Jews' mission to die for God, to die for Judaism, to die for emunah and Hashem and our monotheism. It's a really big lesson, and it's such a big lesson that every kid, that's what they learn. They learn that even more than Lech Lecha. That's the main story. Avram the kivshan haesh, Avram in the fiery furnace. So why is it not written in the Torah? So I saw two answers to this question. They kind of contradict each other, but I think they're awesome. First answer is from the Alter of Slobodka. Says the Alter of Slobodka. So the question again. The lesson of Avram willing to die for God, being thrown into a fiery furnace for the belief in God, is the belief against avodah zarah, idolatry. So why is that not open in the text? So says the Alter of Slobodka, he says, wait a second. Avram's the first Jew. From Avram we learn what it means to be a Jew, how to act like a Jew. So if the first story that I had from Avram Avinu was that Avram Avinu it jumps into a fiery furnace for his belief in God, and that's how we start our story. It's even before God speaks to Avram. Avram is willing to die for God. So then what's every Jew going to say? The only way I could be a good Jew, the only way I could ever reach a level of Avram Avinu is if I'm willing to die for God right now and do mesirut nefesh. Now, while it's true, the halacha says that we have to give up our life for God. This is one of the things that we do, avodah zarah, where you have to die and not give into avodah zarah. That's a true statement, and every Jew ultimately one day has to realize that reach the level of emunah that we're willing to do that. Rabbi Akiva, he prayed, when will be the day that I can do bechol nafshecha, give my life to God? But that's not what we're supposed to be thinking about on a day-to-day basis. We're not supposed to be thinking about it on a day-to-day basis. We're supposed to be jumping into fiery furnaces. If the situation comes about, then we have to. But a Jew is supposed to live every single life now, in the doing of the mitzvot. What makes Avram so great? What made him this great Jew? It's not that he jumped into the fiery furnace. That was great. That was awesome. But at the same time, that's not what God is trying to. The message God is trying to tell us is that what made Avram really great and why he was really picked was because he was honest. He believed in tzedek and mishpat, and he did chesed, and he was teaching people. He was a teacher, and he was helping people, and he loved his wife, and his emunah was great. But the bigger picture of Avraham was that he lived a life of a Jew on a day-to-day basis, and that's what we have to strive for. So it's true the halacha is push comes to shove of avodah zarah or death. We choose death. But we're supposed to look at Avraham Avinu as the first Jew and say, I can be like Avraham in the chesed chesed that I do, in the kindness, and the helping people, and the making aliyah, and doing all the mitzvot that Avraham did on a more day-to-day basis, that's the goal for what it is to be a good Jew. And the other thing, if it happens, it happens, but it's not something that, that's the only way I could be a good Jew is if I jump into a fiery furnace. Okay, that's the approach of the altar of Slobodka. But then I heard a different approach. And this is based on the Lev Eliyahu, Rav Eliyahu Lopian. He says as follows. In a different context, but we can relate it to our case right now. So as follows. From the opposite perspective, jumping into a fiery furnace, that's a major statement of emunah, but there are so many Jews who are willing to make that statement. We're not trying to belittle it or play it down right now, but how many Jews that we know that push comes to shove, they will die to be a Jew. During the Holocaust, how many Jews were willing to say, listen, ultimately I'm a Jew, I'm not giving that up right now, I'm going to die for this. In the Spanish Inquisition, the exact same thing. And there are so many Jews till today that are going to say, push comes to shove, I might not be doing that much right now, I might not be the most observant Jew right now, but if it's being a Jew or death, I'm going to choose death, meaning giving up my Judaism, or death, I'm not going to give up my Judaism, I'm going to die right now, because to be a Jew is so important. How many soldiers do we have here in Israel that are willing to die? 18-year-olds saying, I believe in this country, I believe in this peoplehood over here, and I'm willing to die for the sake of Judaism, for the sake of my peoplehood. It's a big statement. Avraham, if we would have had this story of Avraham Avinu being thrown into the fiery furnace, so I might have thought, that's the hardest thing in the world. But that's the biggest statement. But it's not true. Because on a day-to-day basis, to constantly do chesed, to constantly teach Torah, to constantly be a good person, that's actually more difficult. Because to die as a Jew, that's a major one act, but a major act of emunah and a big statement. And not everybody can live up to that statement, but many, many, many can. But to live day by day as a Jew, for every move that I make, to be tzedakah mishpat, to do it properly. I'm not cutting people off on the road when I want to speed by people. I'm keeping halacha, I'm being a good person, I'm helping, I'm teaching day in and day out, I'm not giving up. That's the harder level. And Hashem's trying to tell us, you want to be like Avraham Avinu? Then day by day I have to live like a Jew. Shabbat Shalom.